Welcome back, everybody. This is Linnell Gardner from the estate of Sonny Liston. I'm going to be reading from my book, Beast, The Deconstruction of Charles Sonny Liston. I want to kind of clear up some of the misunderstanding that was caused by Showtime Sports and their documentary, Pariah, The Lives and Deaths of Sonny Liston. Some of my concepts were used and misinterpreted. So I want to be able to straighten those things out. And I want to read my letter to the Department of Justice that stated that I wanted them to release the FBI file on the fights, the 1964 and 1965 Muhammad Ali Sonny Liston fights. Because the FBI had a release of the file, I think like 6 or 7 years ago, of Sonny Liston, and I think part of Ali file. They make a public announcement and they tell the public they're going to open up the vault, and they only display maybe 300 to 400 pages. So it's kind of misleading when they say they're going to open up the vault when at least Sonny had at least 3,000 to 4,000. I think he had 4,000 pages, and there are other. I don't know what I know the Muhammad Ali, the Ali family sued for the files. I wasn't sure. I'm not sure how many pages they got, but I know a friend of mine that did help to make the Whitey Bulger documentary. She told me that if you watch that documentary, she told me that a real file is at least, some files are at least 50 to 40,000 pages long. So again, it's very misleading when they say they're opening up the vault when the FBI says this to the public. But I wanted to prove, I was working off the hypothesis that my grandmother, Geraldine Liston, said, which was no one knew Sonny like I knew Sonny. I was always by his side. All they want to talk about are the lies. So I used that as my hypothesis when I started to go about collecting the official records of Sonny in 2005. And one thing that I wanted to get was the FBI file. First, I got the FBI file, part of it, because like I said, you can only get so many pages. But then I thought, why don't I get the fight file? Because the fight file has never been, no one's ever asked for the fight file but me. I wanted to get the fight file because they said the fights were fixed. The 64 and 65 Ali Liston fights were fixed. So I wanted to find out if it's true. And that's why I finally got the fight file. I think it was 2018 that actually DOJ, I was trying to get it through, the fight file through the FBI, and they were just giving me the runaround. So I went through the whistleblower program with the Department of Justice, and they released the fight file through the whistleblower program to the public. Well, secretly, they just put it online, and then their news connections wrote about it. So the fight file is 465 pages, and there's nothing in the fight file about the fights, because as I've told you before, boxing was investigated by the FBI, and Kofefer, I think I'm pronouncing this right. I think he was a senator. He investigated boxing in the 50s. So they knew that the fights were not fixed. Their main concern was enemy number one, and that was the Nation of Islam. They considered the Nation of Islam a hate group. And I'm going to get into the file on the black people. The FBI has always had a file on the black race, and I'm going to get into that later. But I want to clear up I want to read you my letter to the Department of Justice, and I want to, because I felt that the FBI and the DOJ were partly responsible for helping to maintain this myth of the fights being fixed, because they knew that the fights were not fixed, but they never made a public announcement of their findings until I got them to release the fight file in 2018. So the fights were 1964 and 1965. And it took me 12 years to give up on the FBI and then go to the Department of Justice whistleblower program and get them to release just the fight file. And that was 2018. So this is my letter. I'm going to read it to you now. This was 2017, October. Department of Justice request letter to release only the Ali Liston 64-65 fights part of the file. So I basically wanted them to take the entire file, FBI file on Sonny Liston, and Ali, and just give me the condensed fight file. I didn't want all that other stuff, even though I do have parts of the Sonny Liston file. I just wanted just the fights, because I wanted to prove my grandmother's. I wanted to see if my grandmother's hypothesis was right or wrong. And again, she told me that if the fights were fixed, she didn't see any money from the fights. Because again, whenever Sonny got extra money, which from winning a fight, he would shower her with gifts. And she told me that didn't happen after those fights. So I wanted to prove her hypothesis and see if she did she really know more than everyone else about Sonny, more than the movie makers, the book writers, more than the news agencies, television, sports commentators, sports athletes. She stated before she died that no one knew Sonny better than I knew Sonny. With all the official records that I've found so far, which I have all the official records now. She was right. There's no one that knew Sonny more than she did, and the reason and she's told these things to people in the past, what she's known about Sonny. But a black woman in the 60s, 50s, and 60s was not listened to. Black people, period, were not, listened to, because why care what black people have to say? We had no power. We had no economic power, political power. So why invest in what black people have to say? That's how it was, and it was for me growing up. I'm not saying I didn't have white friends there and that supported me and were my comrades, and my friends, and white families that treated me like one of their own. But I'm saying that on a governmental level, black people were not. They weren't investing in Black America. So anyway, let me read this letter. Dear Mr. Michael Corton, okay, my name is Linnell Gardner, and I'm in charge of the Sonny Liston estate. I'm the grandson of Sonny Liston, and I'm in charge of all business pertaining to the estate. The 1964/1965 fights between Muhammad Ali and Sonny Liston were considered at the time to be fixed by the public at large and the press. And all parties involved, including the families, managers, and promoters, were considered to have been involved in some type of conspiracy to fool the public. But the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover knew that this was not true. The FBI file number 172-31 on Charles Sonny Liston clearly shows that the FBI did not want to open an investigation on the Sonny Liston/Ali fights, because the FBI knew that the fights were not fixed. The FBI felt that the press was basing its leads off of rumors, and the FBI did not trust the press. The FBI had just investigated boxing in the 1960s and would just continue to rely on its continued wiretapping, boxing experts, informants, and contacts within the boxing commission nationwide. The problem was that Mr. J. Edgar Hoover never released his findings to the general public and the press at that time. And 52 years later, the speculation surrounding the fights have become the source of movies, books, and have continued to bring shame and humiliation to all families involved with the fights, casting a negative shadow over these two great titans. Mr. Ali and Sonny Liston were best friends, and our families have been close since the fights. I knew that Mr. Ali's health was getting worse and worse for years. My goal for the past 12 years was to bring a resolution to this case and to redeem the Muhammad Ali and Sonny Liston names. My goal was to do this before Mr. Ali died. Unfortunately, I was not able to accomplish this while he was still alive. But in death, I still have the chance, with your help, to allow Mr. Ali, his fans, family, the press, the opportunity to see these fights in a different light. I cannot do this without the help of the FBI, who I feel have the responsibility to let it finally be known to the press and to the general public that these fights were not fixed, and to clear both fighters of any wrongdoing and allow this story to come to its final conclusion. I would like you, Mr. Corton, along with Mr. James Comey, if possible, along with myself, to hold a press conference to submit our statements and findings. Mr. Corton, I would like you to explain during the press conference the details of why Mr. Hoover at that time chose not to present his findings to the public and the press, and to discuss why Mr. Hoover believed that there was no fix, and to also explain why Mr. Hoover and the FBI believed that an open investigation was not necessary. I've spoken to your historian, Mr. John Fox, and he is currently reviewing the Sonny Liston file, and he will be getting back to me in about a week. I look forward to speaking to you soon about this matter. Sincerely, Linnell Gardner, Sonny Liston estate. So once I received the FBI file from the Department of Justice whistleblower program, I understood why J. Edgar Hoover, the Department of Justice, and the FBI could not talk about the fights at that time. Even though they knew the fights were not fixed, even though they had been investigating boxing since the 50s, it wasn't about boxing. They had to continue to maintain their surveillance of Muhammad Ali because he was part of the Nation of Islam. So they couldn't show that they were investigating boxing because of Ali. Ali was still boxing. They had wiretaps on Ali. They could not show at that time that they were investigating the Nation of Islam and Muhammad Ali. They couldn't bring up the fights at that time. Even though they knew the fights were not fixed, they were still on Muhammad Ali because of his connection to the Nation of Islam. So I guess they figured if they would have made that announcement that they were investigating boxing, they would reveal that they were investigating Ali at the same time. So I understand. I understand why they couldn't do it, why they could not make that announcement. When I got the FBI fight file and saw that it was all about the Nation of Islam, and that fight file started in 1966, I understood why J. Edgar Hoover and the DOJ and the FBI couldn't make that announcement. They were still investigating Ali. So, also the contacts, once they released the fight file in 2018, they used the press, because once they put it online, they didn't come out and say, like, we're opening up the vault to the Ali Liston fights. They didn't say that. Like, traditionally, the FBI would make that announcement. But since they already kind of released the Sonny Liston file and they released the Muhammad Ali file, parts of it, I think like, I don't know, 8 years ago, something like that, they couldn't come out and say, once they say they open up the vault, that means they open up the vault. That should be everything, right? So I think why they didn't make the announcement was because it would have looked, the pre-release of the Ali Sonny file, it would have looked a little suspicious or illegitimate that they said they opened up the vault, and then they're going to open it up twice? I thought you opened it up. I thought you opened up the vault the first time. So I think that's why they just put the file online and then had the press see it and then write about it. So that's that. Now I want to get back into my book. Again, I want to straighten out the mess that Showtime Sports made with my work and get into a little bit about the fight, what that meant politically, socially, for and spiritually for the Black community. Okay, here we go. And again, my book is on Amazon. You can check it out, read it for yourself. Here we go. When I started my research for this book in 2008, I knew that this theory I had for the reason why the world was booing Mr. Ali and favoring Sonny Liston in both their two fights together would become a point of contention for those who would read my book. But at the time, there wasn't any way for me to put my theory to the test. My theory was based entirely on my personal experiences with racism in America. Now, I want you to understand my personal experiences. Now, if you watch Pariah, The Lives and Deaths of Sonny Liston, they have three African-American, three African-American scholars, teachers, professors, who say all Black people think alike. That is not true. That, again, is a racist trope. This is how I think. This is why how I put my interpretation of how Sonny lived and died, the way I wrote about it is the way I think, right? So how I constructed my story, the construct of my story is mine, comes out of my own brain, my idea, my perception of life, what I went through growing up in the Bay Area, growing up as a Black male, growing up as part British, part German, part African American, part Apache, part Cherokee. That's unlike anyone else on the planet, right? My perception. It's basically my perception. So to say that these professors to go on this Showtime special, Pariah, The Lives and Deaths of Sonny Liston, and say all Blacks think alike sounds like a cover-up to me. No Black person in my lifetime would ever say that, because the documentary, the Showtime documentary was written by a white male. The director wrote the script. Why is there a script for a documentary? I mean, my concepts are linear, okay? So there's a beginning, middle, and an end. If you're going to you can't just take part of the concept. You have to. You can't just take the beginning of a concept. You can't take the middle, just the middle. You can't just take the end. You got to have the beginning, middle, and the end. And when you're giving a discussion, let's say we're all commentators. Let's say we're all athletes. We're all boxers. and they're going to talk about boxing. They want us to talk about boxing. So I'm going to have my experience as a boxer based on. I'm going to talk about boxing based on my experience, and then another boxer is going to talk about boxing based on their experience. Even though we're all boxers, we don't all fight the same way, right? Boxing is a manifestation of our personalities, our experiences, how we box, our style. That's how we create our own style. It comes out of our personality, right? So to have everybody think the same way, it's a logical fallacy. So in order for them to say my concepts on that show, they have to, one professor has to start from the beginning, another has to start in the middle, and another one has to start at the end, come up with the end, to keep the concept linear. And that's what they did on this show. To make my concepts clear, they had to talk about it in a linear fashion. And I'm going to get into Darwin, because I'm the only person that talked about Darwin in the context of Sonny Liston in history. And that was in my book in 2013. Sean Sell wrote his book, The Murder of Sonny Liston, Las Vegas, Heroin and Heavyweights, which is what the Showtime sports special is based on. Pariah, the lives and deaths of Sonny Liston, is based on his book. So I wrote my notes. My notes are in the Library of Congress in 2008. I wrote my book. I published my book in 2013. Sean Sell published his book in 2016. Right? And I'm the only one to bring Darwin and Aristotle into the conversation about Sonny. I'm the first. So you'll see that. I'm going to talk about that in another video about how Darwin influenced race and how it affected how people perceived white supremacy, black people, slavery, the politics of race. Right? I talk about that as one of my concepts, and that concept, Darwinism and all that, it's in the Showtime special. Where'd they get that from? In any case, I digress again. So let's move on. So my theory was based entirely on my personal experience with racism in America. The core of my book was based on this premise. I was taking an incredible risk by basing my entire book on this idea. But for me, the race issue was the only explanation I could come up with for why the world was responding to both fighters so uncharacteristically. Let me start that sentence one more time. I was taking an incredible risk by basing my entire book on this idea. But for me, the race issue was the only explanation I could come up with for why the world was responding to both fighters so uncharacteristically. Racism was the only thing in my mind that actually made any sense. And on August 2nd, 2012, while doing research on the Liston Ali fights, I found this quote. Clay's brashness did not endear him to white America, and in fact made Liston a more sympathetic character. In the New Republic, the magazine's editor, Mary Kempton, a future Pulitzer Prize winner for distinguished commentary, wrote, Liston used to be a hoodlum. Now he is our cop. He was the big Negro we pay to keep sassy Negroes in line. So they used that quote. They didn't actually make it a quote. They just made it commentary. But they used that quote in Sean Sell's book and in the Showtime special. And it's never been used in that context in history until my book. But all of a sudden, Sean Sell and Showtime, we all think alike, right? Anyway, So, Sonny Liston's loss to Muhammad Ali angered many white people because he went to battle not against Muhammad Ali, but against the greatest propaganda machine in modern history, the United States government. Even with America's military might and the power of their mass media, Sonny Liston, just by staying on the ground, exposed white supremacy for what it was, a lie. If the fix was in, then Muhammad Ali and Sonny Liston conspired to unite in the struggle for freedom and equality. If Sonny took a dive, then he took a dive so that the American people might finally be able to live out the meaning of their creed. Sonny stayed down and rolled around on the ground because he might have known consciously or subconsciously that the championship belt was not worth the loss of his soul. He stayed on the ground because the last leg of the race for freedom had to be run by the next generation. So he passed his baton on to Muhammad Ali. He stayed down on the ground because he knew that the Negro had to die with him so that he could one day be resurrected in a new light. When Muhammad Ali yelled down at Sonny Liston to get up, you bum, Muhammad Ali, like John the Baptist, had baptized Sonny in the Holy Spirit, not of forgiveness, but of penance or repentance for the remissions of sins. Sonny's old self could not get up from the canvas, even if he wanted to, because he knew, along with the Nation of Islam, that the Southern political strategy and the world had plans to turn him into another Ota Benga. Ota Benga was the man who was put on display at the 1904 World's Fair. He was brought from the Belgian Congo by the Nordic explorer Samuel Werner and was exhibited with other pygmies as an emblematic savage, along with other strange people in the anthropology wing. The first stop in America was influenced by what some call Darwinism, Barnumism, and racism. Ota Benga ended up at the Bronx Zoo, where he was put on display in the monkey house. In 1960, Benga committed suicide by shooting himself with a borrowed pistol because he was never able to live down his fame as a savage. End quote. Sonny Liston, since the time of his death, has remained in a cage for over 40 years because the American people will not release his image as a noble savage from their minds. We have continued to see him in this light because we have yet to accept the fact that he had lost to Muhammad Ali. Sonny Liston's image has been frozen in time, and that is why our last memory of him is of him on his back looking up at Muhammad Ali. The reason why the most iconic picture of the 20th century is still the Ali Liston photo is not because of the controversy over whether Sonny Liston took a dive or not, or if the Italians, Blinky Palermo or Muhammad Ali all conspired to cheat the American people, because the idea of a fix had been disproved by scientists, Howard Cosell, Muhammad Ali, Sonny Liston, and some of the greatest boxers of all time almost half a century ago. Even when the Phantom Punch was shown from the other side, where you could see the anchor punch land across Sonny's temple, people still want to believe that there was wrongdoing. Why do people want to continue to make this more than just another boxing match? The reason why the Ali Liston photo is still the source of public fascination to this day is because of what the photo represents for those people who cannot let go of the past. And I quote, "Although it is a complicated historical issue, racism in the Western world stems primarily from two related historical processes: taking land from and destroying indigenous peoples and enslaving Africans to work that land. To teach this relationship, textbooks would have to show students the dynamic interplay between slavery as a socio-economic system and racism as an idea system." Sociologists call this the social structure and the superstructure. European slavery was different in the 1500s because it became the enslavement of one race by another. Increasingly, whites viewed the enslavement of whites as illegitimate, while the enslavement of Africans became acceptable. Unlike earlier slaveries, children of African American slaves would be slaves forever and could never achieve freedom through intermarrying with the owning class. The rationale for this differential treatment was racism. As Montesquieu, the French social philosopher who had such a profound influence on American democracy, cognitive dissonance, ironically observed in 1748. It is impossible for us to suppose these creatures to be men, because allowing them to be men, a suspicion would follow that we ourselves are not Christian. As here Montesquieu, again my French is really bad, presages cognitive dissonance by showing how we molded our ideas about blacks to rationalize our actions. James W. Lowen. The American people still have yet to accept not that Sonny Liston should have won the fight, but that racist ideology had lost. And most importantly, that it was the American government that should have been held responsible for having perpetuated one of the greatest hoaxes of the 20th century on its own people. And I quote, myth fulfills in primitive culture an indispensable function. It expresses, enhances, and codifies belief. It safeguards and enforces morality. It vouches for the efficiency of ritual and contains practical rules for the guidance of man. Myth is thus a hard-worked active force. We continue to try to dissect this fight like we dissected Nathaniel Turner's body after he was hung for leading a slave rebellion, dismembering him limb from limb in order to find out the secret to his powers, to lead and almost overthrow an entire state government, unwilling to accept the fact that he was just a man like any other man that was capable of not only great courage, but also infallibility. Sonny Liston lost to Muhammad Ali simply because Muhammad Ali was the better fighter, and that it had nothing to do with what we believed or did not believe about Sonny's character. Nor did it have anything to do with Mr. Ali having supernatural powers. It was the American people that made these two fights much more than just another heavyweight title fight. We, the American people, must finally come to terms with our shared history in order to bring about healing, or we as a nation will perish. And I quote, shame is considered one aspect of socialization in all societies. According to the anthropologist Ruth Benedict, cultures may be classified by their emphasis on the use of either shame or guilt to regulate the social activities of individuals. Shared opinions and expected behaviors and potential associated feelings of shame are in any case proven to be effective in guiding behavior of a group or society. End quote. Yeah, that's it. There's more to read. I'm going to read a little bit more about Darwin, how I brought Darwin into the conversation in my book and in this fight and in the relationship between Muhammad Ali and the American people and Sonny Liston and the American people. Now, give me a second. You can compare and contrast my work with what was said in the Pariah, the Lives and Deaths of Sonny Liston, and see if there's if what I'm saying is right. I mean, do Do all black people think alike? Do we all come think about Darwin? Or do we all think about Aristotle all the time? You know, do all black people think about the self-loathing that we must overcome, the shame that we must overcome, not only as a people but as a country? Do all black people think about those things? Do all black people think about getting the Ali / Sonny Liston fight file? Do all people think about getting the autopsy report from the Clark County medical office? Do all black people think alike and think, well, why don't people say that Sonny Liston was murdered? So if he was murdered, there must be a cold case on it, right? Because supposedly it's not been solved yet, because people keep trying to solve his murder. You know, every book, every movie, every news article is trying to solve Sonny's murder. Now, my grandmother Geraldine Liston said that she wouldn't have got his health insurance, life insurance policy if he had died of any unnatural causes. So, if everybody thinks alike, all black people think alike, then why didn't the rest of the black race call the Las Vegas police cold case department and find out if there's a cold case for Sonny Liston? What about that? If he was murdered and it was not solved, there should be a cold case on Sonny Liston, right? So why was I the only one to think, if all black people think alike, the only black person in history to find out that there is no cold case on Sonny Liston? How can you be murdered and not have a cold, and that murder not be solved, and there not be a cold case on that murder? Maybe he wasn't murdered, right? Maybe my grandmother was right, and the only reason no one listened to her is because she was a black woman in the 60s. So, if you like what you hear, please click the like button, and please subscribe. Thank you very much.